Live, this is Alan Jones.
Thank you, Andrew. And good evening to you all out there, and thank you for being with me. I know that there are hundreds of thousands of you who don't view the program live. Our content can be viewed on Sky News Facebook or skynews.com.au or my Facebook page, Alan Jones Australia, where hundreds of thousands of our viewers do go. As you know, and the team have been talking about this, Sky News has now been cancelled for a week on YouTube. As I understand it, content going back to July last year has been examined. There have been thousands of video postings on YouTube. Apparently a handful have incurred the wrath of some tech giant in America. Our material here is thoroughly researched. This, of course, is a brazen attack on free speech, inspired undeniably by a fairly comprehensive recent attack on me, but we'll keep saying it as we see it, fully researched and responsible. I've tried from the outset, and that's going back until last February, to be very responsible in dealing with this coronavirus because it affects all of us, all over Australia. I take my role seriously. I try to read everything and share with you what I think is important. You've heard me quote experts here from all over the world. I've taken from day one the text of the Prime Minister on March 15 last year, and you've heard me a million times, but let me say it again, where he said, the truth is that while many people will contract the virus, it's clear, just as people get the flu each year, it is a more severe condition than the flu. But for the vast majority, the Prime Minister talking, as I said last week, this was March 15 last year, for the majority, around 8 in 10 is our advice. It'll be a mild illness and it will pass. However, for older Australians that are more vulnerable, particularly those in remote communities and those with pre-existing health conditions, I know all this off by heart, it is a far more serious virus, and that is our concern. Our aim in all of this is to protect the most vulnerable. Now, not since that statement have those views been expressed by any politician. As you've heard me say, not one political or health official has told us that in the world today, this day, 99.4% of all cases are mild. In Australia, the figure is 98%, better than the 8 in 10 the Prime Minister talked about on March 15. But 1.8%, 59 in ICU. We're never, ever told how old these people are, whether they've got comorbidities, whether they're obese. Why aren't we told this? I've argued that we should be told. Yet with those figures, this is what our city looked like at the weekend. Defence Force personnel deployed to Sydney streets. Paul, writing to me, said, quote, I'm heartbroken as I see my beloved army being used as a political tool by the New South Wales government to assist with, quote, compliance. He said, I'm almost at the point of returning my Australian Defence Medal in protest. I've spoken to my fellow soldiers in my battalion and they are of a similar mind. Paul writes, this is a dark day of infamy and will change New South Wales forever and not for the better. He said, I feel for the diggers who've been drafted into this disgraceful charade. This isn't what they signed up for, unquote. Well, no one knows what orders they have been given. What is the mission of the Defence Force? Is it true that the ADF assisted during... It is true, the ADF assisted during the lockdown in Victoria, but without going into detail, the Victorian brief seems different from the one which applies here in Sydney, if indeed there is a brief. Do they have the power, Defence Force personnel, to arrest civilians or issue fines? There they were knocking on doors. Are you home? You're meant to be in here. God, it's frightening. Are these personnel fully vaccinated? And unless the ADF personnel have been drawn specifically from military police, would they have any training in law enforcement? Isn't it valid to argue that if you have to turn our streets into a military zone to validate public policy, there is something seriously wrong with the policy? The draconian lockdown measures, the shutting down of the construction industry, have they been discussed by the party in government? Pardon me, there's something stuck in my eye. Did they go to Cabinet? Did they go to Executive Council? What sort of show are we running here? A one-woman dictatorship? Might not at Executive Council the very talented governor, a lawyer, Margaret Beazley, have asked to see the evidence to justify these draconian decisions? One government MP wrote to me at the weekend, Alan, I don't know what it will take for MPs to wake up to what is happening in our marginal electorates under the approach Gladys Berejiklian is taking. She is isolating herself more and more, establishing a mini cabinet with mostly yes men called a crisis cabinet, no party room meetings and now no parliament, and only giving lip service from the good advice coming to her from her ministers and MPs. That's from a government MP in New South Wales. All we've had is the daily dose of fear. Remember Berejiklian on the 20th of July saying this?
People who are quite healthy in the morning could be on a ventilator by the evening.
That is the height of irresponsibility. Fear prevails over truth. On the same day, the Health Minister, July 20, said this.
This virus is an extremely transmissible virus. It can kill you and it can kill your family and your friends.
It's unbelievable. The same man on July 22, listen to this.
The most potent virus we've had probably on Earth. It's a shocker.
How do these people get away with this? I mean, we are here, truth tested, fact checked at every turn. How can someone say this? It terrifies people, including young people. It is a dreadful indictment of the political standard. On July 26, a week ago, I reported to you last Monday that Australia-wide there had been 1.15 million tests, 929 positive. That's 0.08% of the population. That was the same day Berejiklian said, repeating the alarmism, listen.
Every time any of us step foot outside our house, we have to assume that we have the virus or anybody that we're remotely coming into contact with has the virus.
Look, I'm sorry, if this is leadership, we can do without it. And then to have the temerity to say to HSC students on July 27...
Please don't stress if you're a Year 12 student.
This is rank ignorance. Of course they're stressed. They're studying at home when they need the collaboration of their fellow students and the direct instruction of their teacher, and now they don't know whether they have to be vaccinated. Listen to this on the July 28 about the vaccination of Year 12 students.
We don't want students coming to face-to-face learning, getting the virus and then taking it home to their families.
I can't think of any more irresponsible than that kind of terrifying talk. You see, amidst all of this negativism and alarmism, we don't see one piece of health advice. Berejiklian's talking about 50% vaccinations, 60%, 70%. The Prime Minister seems to be talking about 80%. What's it to be? As I said last week, are we looking at vaccination rates to get us out of the mess or transmission rates? We're not told. I'll come to that in a minute with another ridiculous press conference. But is this going to be the Prime Minister's news poll moment? Politically, Turnbull, remember, pardon me, something funny with my... Oh dear, someone's got at me. What do I say? Yeah, remember when Turnbull set the bar for his own destruction? 30 news polls, said Turnbull, and Abbott had to go. But when Turnbull went past the 30, he thought he should stay. Well, what happens now if we don't reach the Prime Minister's 4-phase national plan where you have to get to 70% before we move out of the, quote, current suppression phase? We've only got 3.7 million people fully vaccinated. 10.7 million have to receive both jabs to get to 70%. All up another 16.8 million vaccine doses. Now, the government has failed on so many fronts. Why the hell would it set itself this bar? And remember one thing, in all the mistakes that have been made, from the Ruby Princess to quarantine, not enough vaccines, the mixed messages about the vaccines, not one senior health official or advisor has fallen on his sword, not one, who was responsible for the 28 changes in the COVID rules in 36 days. 28. How can police enforce rules that they don't understand? The government doesn't even understand them. Since the 23rd of June, there have been 28 changes. There have been 3 changes to face masks. Now, rightly or wrongly, this is the guts of it. I see vaccine certificates coming into view. Big business is demanding discussions about mandatory vaccination and calling it a common sense approach. Sydney's biggest businesses are telling the New South Wales government they should require all workers to be vaccinated before they can be allowed to work. Qantas says all aviation workers should have to have the vaccine. Now, I am totally opposed to this sort of compulsion, but I am not the government. So don't be left behind. Talk to your doctor. You want to travel? You want to go interstate? You want to go to the footy? Talk to your doctor and get vaccinated. But politicians don't understand the mess they've made of this. Professor Bruce Robinson is the outgoing chair of the National Health and Medical Research Council. He said at the weekend that advice regarding AstraZeneca from the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation was wrong. That's where it's recommending against people under the age of 60 getting AstraZeneca. Last week, the same body was saying everyone eligible in Sydney should consider taking AstraZeneca. It's very hard for the public to understand where the so-called experts are presenting conflicting or changing views. Professor Peter Collignon is an infectious disease physician who's worth listening to at the ANU. He's saying what I've said, talk to your GP, but then he says this of younger Australians. Quote, you're less likely to die of COVID when you're younger, but he said you're more likely to get the clot. Unquote. He's being truthful here. He's saying AstraZeneca has been approved for people over the age of 18, but then he says this, your risk of dying on the road is higher than dying of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Peter Collignon, Professor Collignon, can be trusted. I've been saying all along, give the public all the information. They're smart enough to deal with it. One fact we need to know, 10 of the 204 cases recorded in Victoria between July 12 and July 28 were fully vaccinated. 25 had received at least one dose. This is the point. Of the 10 who were fully vaccinated and tested positive, none were hospitalised. That said, this alarmism has got to end, and it won't with the current people in charge. As Vicky Campion brilliantly wrote, Barnaby Joyce's partner, wrote at the weekend, quote, when you stop the chippies going to work on a construction site overnight, stop kids from seeing grandma with an arbitrary boundary and no logical explanation, you lose the people who've given us the lowest death rate in the world. She said, when you start fining a kid for seeing his grandmother, that's illogical and authoritarian. As she writes, quote, compassion is in our DNA, along with being ordered around. She said, referring to a point I made last week, we're now sending politicians to empathy training for sexual harassment, which in a world of massive deficits and debts, Vicky said, is like thinking about replacing the wallpaper as the house burns down. But writes Vicky Campion, if you want a real shot at empathy, she's talking to politicians, probably the biggest unreported casualty of COVID, that is the lack of empathy, then premiers should include the following statistics in their daily COVID sermon. Small businesses shutting down, suicides, postnatal depression cases, as new mothers, sleepless and shaking, face another teary day with no hands allowed to offer help. The number of nonnas staring at the ceiling, craving fresh sheets. As she says of Black Lives Matter marches, no overnight strike force came waving $1,000 fines at them. One change should be immediately announced by the thoughtless Berejiklian cabal, which completely lacks compassion. Any elderly relative who is provenly ill should be allowed the company of an immediate family member. I know of a 90-year-old mother at the weekend with a stroke who, under the Berejiklian rules, can't work out under the rules whether she can see a son or daughter. This is a callous indifference that disqualifies those who made such a rule from being the rulers. And by the way, what happened to that COVID Safe app, which is going to be our ticket to a life free of restrictions? Remember, we all got it. $8 million down the drain. Another federal government failure. Scott Morrison's in trouble, so is Gladys Berejiklian. And every day these lockdowns last, I'm telling you, the worse it will get. The poor school kids again. Berejiklian said the health advice last week was school children must get vaccinated. Oh, forget the parents. Now Berejiklian says, oh, they won't need a jab to return to the classroom. What are principals meant to tell their teachers and their kids? But last Thursday, Berejiklian refused to say if students could return to school if they had not been vaccinated. You see, they make it up as they go along. How many kids are doing the HSC? It would be logically impossible to vaccinate all those kids in a couple of weeks. And as I've said already, people can't get the vaccine even if they want it. The ECA in Queensland's been cancelled for the second year. Farmers had already arrived. It's cost farmers thousands and thousands of dollars. Who cares? Who cares? Government is saying whether we like it or not, vaccination numbers are the passport to ending lockdown. It's devastating and draconian stuff. The economy's being smashed, but we're going to have to be the architects of our own salvation here. Governments sure as hell are providing no leadership other than a gold medal in fear. Well, we had another one of these scare conferences today. It's dreadful stuff. 207 cases, day 38 of the lockdown, but 117,009 tests were conducted, which means 116,802 were negative. Or put another way, 0.17% tested positive. In all these 38 days, 15 deaths. The latest man was in his 90s. Passed away at Liverpool Hospital. Sad, but not a word about his comorbidities. And the big issue at the start of the conference was whether a nurse or a doctor should give a jab to someone who's not on the rollout. It wasn't their turn. Now, this nurse apparently gave the jab so it wouldn't be wasted. She was sacked. Wouldn't you think that's a big issue? The Chief Medical Officer of New South Wales, Dr. Chant, was asked about it, whether the nurse would get her job back, to which she said,
"Look, I'm not in the position to know anything about it."
Can you believe it? I don't know anything about it. And our wonderful leaders, Berejiklian and Hazzard, they didn't even come to the defence of the nurse who was sacked. Most probably someone who's done hours and hours on the front line, sacked. Who cares? If you had just a thumbnail of compassion, you'd be saying as one voice, who sacked her? And she is entitled to have her job back. We're constantly told, vax, vax, vax. Don't waste the doses. A nurse uses her discretion. Doesn't waste a dose, she's sacked. But it doesn't shame Berejiklian, Hazzard or Chant. And therein lies proof of the kind of heartless people running this state. And don't those people in southwest Sydney know? When do we get out of this endless lockdown? Listen to this answer.
80% of the adult population vaccinated would get us freedoms.
80% vaccinated. No hope. Further on, she was asked whether 50%, 60% or the wishful 80% vaccination target would guarantee freedom. What's the answer?
You can look to provide easing of restrictions, but that also depends on where the case numbers are at.
I'm telling you, these people don't know what they're doing, you see? What I mean? Vax, vax, vax. Oh, but it won't give us our freedom back. Here she goes again.
It's a combination of reducing, obviously, the case numbers we have, but also increasing the vaccination rates. And it doesn't necessarily mean we'll be as free as we would like.
Oh, and this is leadership? I don't think so. She's basically saying she hasn't got a clue. Pressed about a 50% vaccination rate in some cases, she said.
But I think what is eminently obvious is that, and look at all the states around Australia, that you can't live with Delta.
What the hell does she mean? You can't live with Delta. Who is going to pull her up? Apart from me, you can't live with Delta. There are 25.5 million people in this country. Since this whole coronavirus thing began way back in February, 925 deaths. Gladys Berejiklian, you can't live. That is 0.003% of the population have died. 463 people die every day in Australia. Why does the Premier of New South Wales persist with this alarmism? It is what Theresa May said. I've quoted it endlessly. Variants will keep on coming. She said of the British government, if the government's position is that we cannot open up travel until there are no new variants elsewhere in the world, then we'll never be able to travel abroad again. As Theresa May said, the third fact which the government, the British government, needs to state more clearly is that sadly people will die from COVID here in the UK in the future, as 10 to 20,000 people do every year from flu, unquote. Does Gladys Berejiklian think she's some sort of Florence Nightingale saving us from all death? If so, her ego is out of control. And for mums and dads and school children, the Prime Minister said these premiers take no notice of the Prime Minister. He said last year kids should be at school. He sent his own daughters to school. Dr. Chant was asked whether kids would be at school before year's end. Listen to this.
Is it realistic, or how realistic is it that children go back to school this year?
Look, it really depends on the numbers.
Meaningless. What numbers? What? Then she went on later to tell everyone, say that everyone has a part to play. What part she played, other than standing there and lecturing everyone, calling certain jobs essential and non-essential, while on full pay? But we had the usual ringer from Gladys. Here we go again.
Can I make this point? And I know that most people share this sentiment. We are all in this together.
Well, if that's the case, Gladys Berejiklian, take a pay cut. Live off $750 a week if we're all in this together. You're making my mate Mohammed at the excellent Malabar Indian restaurant in King's Cross survive. on less than half his usual takings, and small businesses ringing me everywhere on their knees if they haven't already shut down. And you know something, Gladys Berejiklian? You don't understand, you'll never understand, and you don't care that people are living like battery hens. Are you? Gladys, why don't you and your lot take at least a 50% pay cut? You can dish out the medicine, but you won't take it yourself. And finally, Sky News own Andrew Clennell, who's done a terrific job. The halo is fading rapidly from Gladys Berejiklian. The public have woken up. It is a dictatorial, non-consultative government. Andrew Clennell sought to ask another question. The Premier avoids him. Listen to this.
Oh, sorry, I'm answering this question first, yeah.
Yeah, she just bypassed him. Not a good picture there, but I'll answer this question first. Another appalling press conference. The hallmarks of a political leader feeling the heat. She knows her party room is shifting. She's afraid to call a party room meeting. She's frightened they will challenge the public health cabal which surrounds her. The ministry is understanding, as is the party, of the awful mess out there as a result of all of this, and that none of these press conferences make sense. Gladys, your credibility is destroyed utterly because we are not in it together. You have not sacrificed a single dollar. You've experienced no economic hardship, nor has your so-called crisis cabinet, and yet you talk about, listen.
I don't think anybody's going to suggest, least of all me, that living in lockdown is a good place to be. It's horrible.
How would you know living in a lockdown is horrible? Gladys, you've never lived in a lockdown. Give the game away, move on. We need a fresh pair of eyes. We need someone to navigate us out of this sooner rather than later. You transparently can't. Do the honourable thing as Theresa May did. When she couldn't find an answer to Brexit, resign. What do you think? Email me, alan@skynews.com.au, the text line 0414 000 848. Well, just on these lockdowns, the one point I make is that this government and so-called inner cabinet won't listen to anyone with an alternative view. Your response last week to Professor Gigi Foster, a professor within the School of Economics at the University of New South Wales, your response was overwhelming. 5 days on, the problems are worse. Gigi Foster said to us last Wednesday that there are enormous human costs from lockdowns. My correspondence confirms the tragedies that are unfolding. I thought I'd ask Professor Foster back, and she joins us. Professor Foster, thank you for your time. I learnt at the weekend of a 90-year-old woman who had a stroke. She was found unconscious in her home alone. No one in her family was allowed to accompany her to the hospital or to visit her. How callous can we get, Gigi Foster?
It's heartless, and it's amazing because last year I was the one who was accused of being heartless and that it was callous to disregard life. And in fact, the disregard of life is exactly what we are seeing now and what we have been seeing both here in this state and in Victoria, particularly, and even in other states, including Queensland, which just recently called a lockdown, as you know, Alan. And what you're trying to do here, I think, is make sense of policies which are, as you say, irrational. These are senseless policies. These are policies that are really creating the most destruction that I've seen in any developed country in my lifetime. Absolutely. And it's a misery to live through.
Professor, shouldn't there be a simple rule that with any seriously ill family member, another family member must automatically be entitled to accompany that person or to visit?
Look, those kinds of compassionate rules, of course, would make much more sense than what we're seeing. But again, you're trying to make sense of something that inherently is senseless. What has happened is that Gladys, along with much of the state and many of her leadership, have been possessed by a crowd dynamic. In previous generations, previous centuries, people would say that she was possessed by demonic spirits or something. Now, I don't believe in demons, but there is still a crowd dynamic that's happening. And last week I spoke of the Prohibition period as one example. Another is early Nazi Germany, where people were just obsessed with a particular thing. In that case, Jews are bad, and rationality went out the window.
Gigi, surely if you have to bring in the unvaccinated defence personnel and thousands of police and people knocking on your door to make sure you're home, what image is this sending around the world? And surely, if you've got to do that to defend a policy, there must be something wrong with the policy.
Absolutely. I mean, we are descending into a totalitarian system. Just on the weekend, to see how the New South Wales police barricaded, the routes into the centre of Sydney and had cop cars all around Hyde Park, closed the bridge, closed the tunnel, just to prevent peaceful protest. And yet there is a claim that we can still protest, but we can't actually get together. So how can that happen? So effectively, we've been blockaded from being able to exercise our free right of protest. And for these and other reasons, it's just clear this is not a policy of rationality. It is a crowd dynamic. And so the question is, how does a crowd break up? What happens in history when you have a crowd? What makes it break up? And I'll tell you, it doesn't happen quickly. And the people who are in power press that power button as many times as they can get away with before they're finally deposed.
Absolutely. Great to talk to you. And listen, stay in tune. We'll talk again next week. It's good to have someone like you sharing those views with people out there who just feel no one is prepared to listen to them. Grateful for your time, Gigi. I understand. Not at all.
Thank you, Alan.
There she is. Isn't she wonderful? Breath of fresh air, Professor Gigi Foster. Back after the break.
Now, back live with Alan Jones.
Yes, well, Justin from Newcastle, big tech strikes again. It seems like they censor what they don't agree with rather than incorrect information. Noel from Melbourne, Sky News getting banned from YouTube just shows the power these big tech organisations have. It's scary stuff. Lauren from Toowoomba, I can't believe YouTube, owned by Google, have decided to silence an entire news channel. It seems like overkill if you ask me. Harrison from Sydney, the people continue to suffer while our state leadership don't seem to be lifting the restrictions anytime soon. How long can this go on before total collapse? Melissa from Geelong, there are mixed messages coming from all levels of government. How are we meant to follow this nonsense? Aaron from Perth, how are Aussie students meant to concentrate on their studies during all of this? I fear they fall behind. Daniel from Tamworth, seeing the army in Sydney makes me wonder what country I'm living in. And Sean from Wollongong, I can't believe we've got soldiers in the streets. My son overseas is asking if they're driving tanks. That doesn't seem to be too far-fetched anymore. It's terrible, isn't it? Terrible. It's not Australia. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? I remember speaking to the Prime Minister Morrison over 2 years ago about help for our Olympic athletes. We had several meetings. Nothing has come of it. Now he's talking about a 10-year program to help athletes up to the 2032 Brisbane Olympics. But I repeat what I've said. Gina Rinehart, not the taxpayer, has been a central factor in the success of swimming, rowing, athletics and volleyball. Have a look at the gold medals in rowing and swimming. Gina Rinehart has been amazing. No other word for it. I'm also proud to say that Gina Rinehart is a generous sponsor of this network. Too many of our great athletes are lost to the sport because they can't survive. It's an expensive business. Our athletes live on the smell of an oily rag, yet look what hope and joy and pleasure and pride they've given us. I have to say, I wonder how much longer can the Olympics continue with the greatest athletes in the world performing for nothing. Someone's making a massive quid. Elton John doesn't sing for nothing. A dentist doesn't fill teeth for nothing. But unless governments, and that is taxpayers, tip in money, the athlete wins honour and glory, some recognition, which is fleeting, and perhaps something from government, which, as I said, is the taxpayer. But there are many gold medalists, the best in the world at what they do, walking around today with the backside out of their pants. I could name them. So it's interesting to note what other countries do. Have a look at this table for what other countries are doing for their athletes. Singapore, $1 million if we win a gold medal. Little Hong Kong, $840,000. Kazakhstan, $337,000. Or put another way, have a look at Brazil. You win a bronze medal there, you get more than if you're an Australian who wins gold. Remember last week I told you about the Philippine weightlifter, Hidilyn Diaz, a lady who's won the Philippines' first ever gold medal. Ending a 97-year drought, the 30-year-old lifted an Olympic record 127 kilos in the clean and jerk. Along with the gold medal, she'll receive a house and $660,000 in cash prizes from the government and business people. Certainly Australians, Emma McKeon, these people won't be getting a house and $660,000 in cash. But look, I've got to say, you can't pay the bills on honour, glory, applause and headlines. It'll be interesting to see what Brisbane comes up with. I'll be interested in your thoughts. But the way government operates in this country, you'll get the answer, we'll look into it. Remember, these athletes bring great credit to their country. They make great sacrifices, as do their parents. And what joy do they give us? If we can't do better than some of those countries on that table, there is something seriously wrong. Well, let's go to Mark Latham, the hope of the side on so many fronts. Mark, good to talk to you. Your thoughts on the Olympics? Quick one.
Well, it's been fantastic, Alan. I'm here in Sydney lockdown. You need some respite from the misery, the hardship, the loss of opportunity for people, loss of jobs. So at least it's giving something for people to cheer about in the toughest of times. It's fantastic.
Yeah, just on that, these areas that have been locked down are areas you know backwards, and we've talked about it often. How on earth can these people manage on $750 a week?
Well, they're struggling, and there's been some crazy decisions. Why was construction and building locked down for 2 weeks to reopen it? It takes a couple of weeks to get it functioning at full capacity. So that was all for nothing. People screaming blue murder, the economic hardship out of that phenomenal. Why is an area like Shell Harbour, other places like Wallandilly and Central Coast, massive areas full of economic potential, why are they locked down when there's no COVID wild in the community? These are very hard things for people to understand. And effectively, all those areas locked down, Alan, they're paying the price for the problems in places like Fairfield and Cumberland, Canterbury. The truth is, if you overlay the ethnic demographic map of Sydney, it coincides with the COVID hotspots. It just shows there is a soft underbelly to multiculturalism. The government has skated around it. It's not politically correct to talk that way. There's problems there. English language skills, willingness to observe the rule of law that the government's ignored, and that's why the virus has got out of control and these lockdowns are so extensive and so harmful to people.
But Mark, you're a member of the Parliament of New South Wales. Where is the Parliament? Where is the debate on these things? Where is the Governor and Council? Why haven't these draconian decisions or the health advice that closed down the construction industry gone to the Governor, Margaret Beazley, who would say, well, where is this advice that justifies what you're doing? Where is the Parliament, Mark?
Well, the Parliament's suspended. They've got rid of the sittings for August on the advice of the Chief Health Officer, who'd close anything down at the smell of a virus. She said the Parliament can't sit. So, unfortunately, it's not the job of the Governor, Alan. It's the job of the Parliament.
No, I know that.
To demand accountability, to find out the health advice. There was no health advice about the construction lockdown. I doubt there's any health advice to say take the Pfizer jabs off 70-year-olds in the bush and give it to healthy 17-year-olds in Parramatta. So the health advice in many cases just it doesn't exist. And the problem we've got, Alan, we've returned to the days of Governor William Bligh, where the people running New South Wales are hiding under their beds instead of getting out there and sitting as a parliament, demanding accountability, putting forward a debate, alternatives to the disaster we've got under Gladys Berejiklian. People are hiding under their beds, and MPs, quite shamefully, on full pay, Alan, full pay, have been on social media saying, oh, we're watching the Olympics. Well, good luck to you. But, I mean, people are suffering. The parliament should be sitting.
Magnificent. But where's this going to end? I mean, who's going to pull this woman into line? I have to say to you, I think this is one of the most stubborn dictatorial leaders I have ever met. She cannot be told anything other than by that little cabal that's with her. She ignores all the members of her party. She ignores the cabinet. Where is this going to end, Mark? Who's going to stand up to this rubbish?
Yeah, well, they've closed down the parliament. The Labor opposition, they're no opposition at all. They agreed to closing down the parliament. They're happy with the health dictatorship. So shame on them. The truth is about Gladys Berejiklian. Now, there's a new piece of spin, a new excuse, a new distraction every day. It was blame Morrison. It was blame the vaccine rollout. Now, the admission today that the lockdown's not even about suppression of COVID. The lockdown now apparently is an extortion racket, whereby we're told if vaccination rates get to 50% by the end of the month, maybe there's a little bit of freedom. It's sort of blackmail of millions of people in Sydney who are suffering. And why 50%? Just on Friday, Morrison said it's 70 or 80% to get to herd immunity. 50% is miles short of herd immunity. Alan, none of these things make sense. None of these things would be based on health advice. This is random, erratic government that is hurting people. People are losing their jobs and losing their minds.
Wonderful stuff, Mark Latham. You give us hope, my friend. You give us hope. Talk to you next week. Thank you for that, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Alan.
Inspirational. We need hope. He gives us a bit of it. Back after the break.
Live with Alan Jones.
Oh, texts everywhere about Professor Gigi Foster. So, yes, we will have her on again. But just one text which is significant. I'm only 15 years of age, says Sienna, but you've opened my eyes to how ludicrous our government is. They've officially lost the plot with the overblown hysteria and alarmism. These kids, they worry me. What are we doing to them? Where do you start with an Olympic rap? We must start with Emma McKeon. Emma won't mind if we don't show any action pictures. We've seen so much of her. What a beautiful, unassuming, modest, gifted person. And the mum's an Olympian, father's an Olympian, uncle's an Olympian. She has now more medals than any Australian in any sport, 11. And Paris is only 3 years away. I don't know where she puts these medals. She won 4 at Rio, but no individual gold. She won 6 at the World Championships in 2017, another 6 in 2019. But it was the individual gold that had eluded her. Now she's gold in 100 freestyle, gold in 50 freestyle, and gold in the 100 butterfly and 4 relays. I should say, without detracting from any of these phenomenal achievements, people like Shane Gould swam at times when we had no swimming depth. We didn't have a breaststroker or a butterfly swimmer or a backstroke swimmer to compete with often unfair European competition, which would have given us a competitive relay. We've won 1 more swimming gold than we did in Melbourne, but in Melbourne there were only 13 swimming events. In Tokyo there were 35. But a phenomenal performance in the pool and such joy. Emma deserves the status of our greatest Olympian. Her dignity and modesty are worth another 11 Olympic medals. And a great job by the relatively unknown 20-year-old Chelsea Hodges from the Southport Club, who had to swim the breaststroke leg in the medley relay. She did it brilliantly against the highly fancied American Lydia Jacoby, and the final leg to brilliantly seal a gold medal. Oh, Kate Campbell. Now, look, I have never met this woman. I think she's one of the finest ambassadors this country's ever had. Gifted in ability, generous in spirit, capital L for leader, one of the finest this country's produced. She delivered a phenomenal last leg of 52.11 seconds. And the final change over to her started some debate around the pool about whether she'd broken. She hadn't. She just took a risk, and then she said at the end of it, you've got to risk it to get the biscuit. I'm glad we got the biscuit. Kate Campbell, you are magnificent. Tonight it's the Matildas in soccer. We're squaring off with Sweden, who beat us a week ago 4-2. We got there with a magnificent 4-3 win over Great Britain on Friday. Sweden are 5 in the world. We rank 9 on tonight. Tomorrow night at 10 o'clock, it's the men's basketball, the Boomers. Brian Goorjian's team finished top of their group, now play a quarterfinal against Argentina. We're 3 in the world. They're 4. That'll be a dogfight. Also tomorrow, a young man from Enoggera in Brisbane, a 28-year-old climber, Tom O'Halloran, our first male Olympic sports climber. He's played every sport known. He competed in the World Youth Championships in Ecuador when he was 15. He then learned in 2016 that sport climbing would be included in these games. It's all on for 4 days from tomorrow. Worth a look. One of the beautiful moments of the Olympics was Kaylee McKeown sharing the podium with one of our greats, Emily Seebohm, after winning gold in the 200 backstroke, and Emily won bronze. Kaylee asked Emily to put the gold medal around her neck and share the number 1 spot on the podium for the playing of the national anthem. Beautiful stuff. Just like last night in the men's high jump, the Australian Brandon Stark was outstanding, 2.35 metres, unbelievable. On the old scale, 7 feet 8 inches, 5th. But the Italian Gianmarco Tamberi and Qatar's Mutaz Barshim both cleared 2.37, which is a touch over 7 feet 8, 2 centimetres over Brendan Stark, 2 centimetres. How big's that? However, on countback and everything, they tied for the gold medal. All the talk, of course, was a jump-off. That's what happens, where one of them would have won. They were seen in deep conversation on the track when suddenly the young man from Qatar and his Italian opponent were hugging, embracing and jumping up and down. They had decided to share the gold medal. Beautiful Olympic moments. Not long after that, in one of the great boilovers, a 26-year-old former Italian long jumper, Lamont Marcel Jacobs, proved himself the fastest man on the planet. I had a few bob on him, I've got to tell you. The Italians have done well everywhere. The young Australian Rowan Browning, who was magnificent in his heat on Saturday night, was just as brilliant in the semi-final, but he had a very poor start. Mind you, the starts were unnerving. All sorts of false starts, terrible for an Olympics. But this kid showed real class. He came through the field at the end for an outstanding 5th. He's very bright. and 99 ATAR. I interviewed him on this program a couple of weeks ago. He just gave too much ground to them at the start. Have a look here and you'll see what I mean. Yeah, I think that's a brilliant run. You saw that there. His coach is the triple Olympian Andrew Murphy. Rowan was a rugby player and a good one at Trinity Grammar, where he was on an academic scholarship. Once he shifted from rugby to running, Andrew Murphy was teaching there. He became the second fastest in the world at the age of 16. He did run 9.96 on January 17 this year with a tailwind. Paris is 3 years away. He is the real deal, this young fellow. A brilliant victory by the men's hockey, the Kookaburras, beating the team that knocked them out in Rio, the Netherlands. It was a nightmare. They won the shootout after being locked up 2-2 at full time, temperature 35 degrees. They're now into the semi-finals after beating the team regarded as one of the European heavyweights, but the gold didn't stop flowing. Matt Wern in the men's laser sailing. This has got to be a nightmare when you don't know what the conditions are like. But another gold to Australia, and the Mr. Nice Guy of sailing, his fiancée is a Belgian sailor. He's 26 from Perth, the Fremantle Yacht Club. And Matt Belcher is bidding to become the first Australian skipper to win 2 Olympic gold medals. They lead in the 470 class. In a pleasing result, the very gifted Australian sprinter from Queensland in 22.11. She is the real deal too, this girl. One to watch, Riley Day. And still on the track, this is big time. Peter Boll was one of 3 Australians in the semi-finals of the 800. He's the first to make an Olympic 800 final since the great Ralph Dubell in 1968. He's a Sudanese refugee whose family fled here to avoid the civil war. He spent 4 years in a refugee camp in Egypt. He came here at the age of 8, only started running at the age of 16. Now he's broken the Australian record twice in Tokyo, won his semi-final comfortably in 1:44.11. Make no mistake, this is good enough to win the men's 800 final on Wednesday night, our time. Have a look at this. Yeah, he's in it up to his neck. It kept coming on the track, Steve Solomon. A magnificent 44.94 and into the semis of the 400. He's now 28. Hard to believe. And co-captain of the Australian team, I remember him when he was 18. It's a big run. Have a look at this, Steve Solomon. Now listen, don't we leave the best to last? This is beyond unbelievable. The young man who comes from Logan City went to Logan High. He's called Logan. He's won the first Olympic BMX gold medal, Logan Martin. This is beyond spectacular. Acrobatic and artistic havoc. He does double back flips on the bike, all while holding the handlebars. He's got 60 seconds to fit in as many crazy tricks as he can, and he's got to impress 5 judges. He said he didn't even do the big tricks. He said, I've got more in the bag. He's been doing this for 15 years. He said, if I'm going to win world championships, I better build something in my backyard. He's done that. He's taken home the BMX gold medal. It's a new world. The modern Olympic star Logan Martin, a 27-year-old Queenslander, and he says this is just the start. He said he played it safe in the final. Who knows what the next step beyond safe is? Have a look at this. God, it's phenomenal. Australians doing phenomenal things and putting a smile on our face. Well, let's go to the learned Peter Gleeson, who joins us each Monday night live from the Gold Coast. Gleeso hosts the front page here on Sky News at 11 o'clock, Monday to Thursday. Also a columnist for Queensland's Courier Mail, Sunday Mail newspaper. Let's get into these ridiculous Queensland lockdowns firstly before we go to the Olympics. Gleeso, Scott Morrison said on July 2, 1 month ago, lockdown should only be the last resort. Now the echo's off. What the hell do you make of it?
Well, it's madness up here, Alan, and I'll tell you what, here I am on the beautiful Gold Coast. The sun is shining, it's a fantastic day, and there's nobody here. And you know what? The local tourism authority, the Gold Coast destination, their chairman, Paul Donovan, I got off the phone from him only an hour ago. He says the coast is on its knees. Tourism in this state is on its knees. They need some form of compensation package. They've written to Frydenberg. They want some sort of JobKeeper for tourism. But you know what, Alan? They're the people tonight that I feel really sorry for, because nobody wants to come to the Gold Coast. Nobody wants to come to Queensland. Nobody wants to come to Australia because there is so much uncertainty and lack of clarity, Peter, when it comes to these decisions.
Peter, 22,000 people are tested. Fewer than 0.05% are positive. Can we get some proportionality here? Where is some leadership, for God's sake?
There is no proportionality, there is no leadership. I mean, at the end of the day, we know that Jeanette Young calls the shots in Queensland. And I mean, she's even out there last week sort of advocating that people under 40 should not be getting the AstraZeneca, when we all know that that's the passport to getting us out of these lockdowns. But it is, honestly, Alan, on the Gold Coast right now, you could shoot a gun through Cavill Avenue.
Terrible, terrible. And then she said that masks may become a way of life for Queensland's near future. I mean, seriously, these people have got to go.
Well, masks are, I think, going to become part and parcel of what we do every day, Alan. I mean, that just seems to be the...
Anything over your face, get it out of the glove box, off the back seat. What?
Yeah. And how many people jump out of the car, Alan, without them and jump, you know, go into supermarkets or whatever. Look, I tell you what, there is no leadership here in Queensland right now.
No leadership anywhere, mate. Look, why don't we could save a whole lot of dough, pack up George Street, pack up Macquarie Street, pack up Spring Street in Melbourne, and let the public health bureaucracies run the show. I can't let you go without the Olympics and the highlights. I mean, the Wollongong girl, Emma McKeon, There must be something in the water at the Griffith University pool.
Well, you know what? If you counted all the medals that Queensland have won in the last 8 days, Alan, we'd be running 9th on the ladder. Beautifully comprehensive report there earlier. Don't forget the 1,500-metre boys tomorrow, Stewie McSwain and Jai Edwards. They're in the heats, and I did warn you about 3 weeks ago, Alan, that these guys are the real deal. Wouldn't it be fantastic if we could reprise the days of Herb Elliott and Ron Clark and do something really special? And, of course, the Boat Desert Bullet, Riley Day, just a minute ago. Hopefully she made the final of the 200.
Absolutely. 1,500. The last time we won that, Herb Elliott in Rome, and he beat the Frenchman, Yazi, by the length of the straight. And it's Herb Elliott's granddaughter who is one of the hosts of the wonderful Channel 7 coverage of it all. Good on you, Gleeso. Lovely stuff. You go keep your swimming up. But listen, we've got to try and do something. Put it on the front page of the Courier Mail. Something's got to give. There he is, Peter Gleeson. Love him. And he's got to be some part of the future Olympics up there, knows the whole scene. We'll be back shortly to wrap it all up.
Back live with Alan Jones.
Look, before we go, when I had lunch with the former Prime Minister Paul Keating about 2 years ago, he was in awe of the amount of wealth now swirling around in our country. Not the old bricks and mortar stuff, but this sort of new age style of wealth being dreamt up by young Australians. It is extraordinary. Now, we saw an example of that today when the American finance firm Square bought Afterpay, which is a buy now, pay later company by Sydney-based founders, young fellas Nick Molnar and Anthony Eisen. Square bought, you ready for it, the Australian-grown Afterpay for an eye-watering $39 billion in shares at $126.21 a share, providing a 31% uplift on Afterpay's closing share price on Friday of $96.66. Nick Molnar, who graduated from Sydney University, and Anthony Eisen, who graduated from the University of New South Wales, started Afterpay in 2014. The pair still have a 6.7% share in the company, and after Square's offer, that's valued at a cool $2.61 billion each. It's a new world. One Afterpay insider said a lot of the staff members have made a lot of money too, some becoming multimillionaires in a day. Now, the buy now, pay later sector is going gangbusters. Think about it. Practically everything can be bought online. So what Afterpay did, in layman's terms, was to convert what we'd call the old lay-by scheme, where you'd have periodic payments to buy something until you paid it off, then you could take it home. They moved the process online and reversed it. You get to take the product home straight away. It breaks up the cost of your item into 4 instalments, which are due every 2 weeks over 2 months. Unlike a loan from a bank, Afterpay doesn't charge the consumer interest for their service. If customers miss an instalment payment, they'll be charged a late fee that starts at $10. Afterpay makes money by charging a commission to businesses on each purchase made through the platform. Last month, they recorded $11.1 billion in sales over the last financial year, a 112% increase from the year prior. They boast 9.9 million active customers. The amount of money spent online shopping is extraordinary, and I suppose that's why the amount of personal credit card debt owed by Australians is around $20 billion. Afterpay have tapped into the now generation. A generation described as wanting everything to be given to them as quickly as possible in return for as little sacrifice as possible. But it's a massive success story for two Sydney-siders and proves good ideas can translate into a huge payday. Which brings me to the thought for the night. Never confuse a single defeat for a final defeat. That's it from me. Paul's up next. See you tomorrow night. Good night.